into it. How about that? Pretty amazing, isn't it, Sarah, what people have, kind of personal taonga. You know, little things can be very special to people.
Absolutely. I was just thinking about Sir Edmund Hillary. I actually met him when I was a young PR pup many, many moons ago and helped launch one of his books here in Auckland and have the photo with his of us together with his signature. That's my taonga.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Keep the panel show intels coming through email, the panel at rnz.co.nz. For now, though, Sarah Sparks, Ian Powell, kia ora. Thanks for being with me. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint is next. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Kei te whakarobo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Susanna Leatawa. E haere aki nei coming up. Christchurch's only 24-hour medical centre closes its doors for the second time in a matter of days because it doesn't have enough staff. Will the real Mr Luxon please stand up? The National Party Leaders Media Conference gets derailed by a heckler. More than 1 million Kiwis are missing out on free money from the government. We'll tell you why. The school's turning to on-the-job training to help fill classroom gaps. It's shaping up as a key Auckland electorate battle, incumbent National MP versus ACT Deputy Leader. We hit the streets in Tamaki. And are you prepared for an earthquake? We'll tell you what you need to know. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie. Good afternoon. I'm Karen McCarthy. The Labour government has found nearly $4 billion in savings across the public service over the next 4 years. It comes as the government's accounts for the 11 months to the end of May show the tax take was $2 billion lower than expected. The money will be saved by cuts to future budget allowances, a clampdown on public sector spending, and money that had been set aside for programs no longer being required. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the cuts are necessary to keep debt below 30% of GDP and return the books to surplus.
It's the responsible thing to do to now say, we've got fiscal rules, I've committed myself, I've got a job to do to meet those, this is how we're going to do it.
Grant Robertson says the money will go into savings as any above and beyond spending could increase inflation. Christchurch's only 24 hours doctor's surgery has closed again this afternoon for the second time in 3 days due to staff sickness and staff shortages. Pickers's Health's Madras Street Clinic is shut from 3:30 until midnight. General Manager of Patient and Provider Services, Lisa Brennan, says they have an ongoing nursing shortage, but today illness pushed them over the edge. She says 4 doctors called in sick, 1 with COVID, and it was unsafe to remain open. An Auckland company that's at the centre of allegations of mistreatment by a group of South American migrants says it hasn't done anything wrong. RNZ podcast Voices has spoken to some of the complainants who claim that they paid thousands of dollars for their visas and were not given the jobs or number of work hours they believed they had signed contracts for. But Build Hub told Voices it's been compliant.
So everything what people that Build Hub have promised to the people, and that it's under the employment relationship with the company has always complied to all of us in the workforce.
Build Hub says 92% of its recruits have work and only 8% aren't working, either due to resigning or being dismissed. Research by Massey University suggests most of us don't know how to react if we get an earthquake alert. Though New Zealand doesn't have an official early warning system for quakes, automated warnings are sometimes issued to Android smartphones. Author Lauren Vanell says a majority of the 3,000 respondents didn't know what to do if they got an alert.
The main thing is that if you feel an earthquake starts, to take action to protect yourself immediately. These warnings can help if people know what they are, who they're coming from and what they're supposed to be doing. But if everyone knows what to do when they feel an earthquake start, then they'll be safer.
Lauren Vanell says the alerts can be useful, but they're pointless if people don't know how to respond. A doctor has closed his practice after a complication during treatment resulted in a woman having both legs amputated. The Aged Care Commissioner found the doctor breached code by failing to refer the woman to hospital immediately. Felix Walton has more.
A woman in her 70s visited the doctor for treatment of a varicose vein, but reported pain in both feet afterwards. The doctor apologised for the complication and advised her on managing the pain, but didn't refer her to a hospital. Less than a week later, she was admitted to hospital with severe pain and discoloration and underwent below-the-knee amputations on both legs. Aged Care Commissioner Carolyn Cooper says the doctor should have referred the woman to hospital immediately. The doctor has apologised and no longer performs vein procedures.
The University of Auckland's Medical Sciences building has been evacuated while emergency crews deal with a hazardous substance. The explosive materials were discovered this afternoon, with the fire alarm triggered at 20 to 2. 3 fire trucks and a special unit are currently dealing with the substance. Roads around the Grafton campus have been cordoned off, with staff and students warned to stay away. In sport, the Tall Blacks must win their second game of the Basketball World Cup against Jordan tonight if they are to progress to the next round of the tournament. New Zealand has the upper hand after winning 2 of the last 3 games between the two countries over the last 13 months. With both teams coming off a first-up loss at the World Cup, coach Pedro Cameron says his side needs to make changes after the USA defeat.
We're always aiming at the complete game. There's always things you must adjust for. It's competition, right? That's the game. And along the way, we fell in some areas that we want to improve on.
The game tips off at 8:40. The Black Caps coach Gary Stead says selectors will weigh up a number of scenarios as they consider whether to include Kane Williamson in the World Cup side. Williamson is in England with the Black Caps while they prepare for a series against the home side as he continues his rehab from a ruptured ACL. The Black Caps will have to name the side for the Cricket World Cup in India in about 2 weeks, and Stead says they're going to give Williamson every chance.
There's a chance that even if Kane was named, that he may not be available right at the start of the tournament, but he also might be, and he also might not be ready. So we're going to give him the full 2 weeks, and for us, it's still a little bit of crystal ball gazing then where he will be at.
Meanwhile, Jimmy Neesham will no longer join the Black Caps T20 squad to face England following the conclusion of the 100 competition. Instead, he'll return to New Zealand early to be with his wife ahead of the birth of their first child. That's the news.
Labour draws up its naughty and nice list.
This is about the rights of trans people. This is about a group of parties that think it's okay to make jokes like we heard about the Ministry of Pacific People. It's about values.
Winston Peters says he's on a roll.
You're asking for an outcome before the people have spoken. These polls are changing rapidly.
And Nessie, fact or fiction?
When we were testing the equipment, we did hear 4 distinctive noises that we didn't know where it was coming from, we didn't know the origin of it was.
Believe it or not. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Checkpoint with Susana Leatawa next after the short forecast from Net Service to midnight on Tuesday. Northland, cloudy periods, isolated showers, long fine spells tomorrow. Auckland to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. 1 or 2 showers clearing and becoming fine, morning frosts tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Manawatu to Wellington. Cloudy with a few showers, gradually clearing, becoming fine tomorrow with morning frost. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Canterbury, mainly fine with morning frosts. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, a few showers about the southern coasts, mainly fine elsewhere. Showers becoming widespread in Fiordland and Southland this evening and isolated showers developing in Otago. And the Chatham Islands, showers clearing tomorrow evening. It's 5:07.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā. I'm Susana Leatawa and Felisa Owen. For the second time in 3 days, there will be no urgent care clinic in Canterbury, with Christchurch's 24-hour surgery reducing hours tonight because of a serious staff shortage. It also had to shut shop on Saturday, with the already stretched workforce being reduced further due to COVID and other winter illnesses. Patients who were seen faced waits of up to 6 hours, while staff have been pulling huge shifts to try to get on top of the backlog. Pegasus Health General Manager of Patient and Provider Services, Lisa Brennan, says the clinic had no choice but to close between 3:30 this afternoon and midnight tonight.
Well, today we had a number of doctors ring in sick, in fact 4 for that afternoon shift, and so on top of our nursing shortages, it's just too unsafe to keep it open.
And is it only because of staff sickness, or are there broader issues around staff recruitment or retention, or both?
Yeah, today was staff sickness that tipped it over, but we have an ongoing issue with nursing shortages and, being able to offer the same pay rates as the hospitals, and we're unfortunately not able to do that at the moment. So hence we're losing a number of staff and finding it difficult to recruit.
How about COVID? Does that play a factor?
Yes, there's some. At least one of those doctors has COVID, so that's it's still an ongoing issue for all health services. Yeah.
How long are the wait times?
They can be quite long, up to 4 or 5 hours at times. So yes, it's an issue, which is why we don't want to contribute to that as well, and so hence we're going to have to close.
And so, what do you say when you turn people away?
Oh, it's tough. We give them some virtual options. So there's a number of virtual providers that will do video consults, and where that's appropriate, we ask them to go there or to local pharmacy who can do a lot of small, minor ailment type work, or otherwise we definitely send them to ED if that is it's appropriate as well.
So your website talks about high demand. Is it high demand, or is it that you're not able to meet the current demand?
It's both. Mondays are particularly high demand, so definitely Mondays are worse than other days. But yeah, it's a combination of all of those things: high demand and staffing.
You also say on your website 320 GPs across Canterbury are affiliated with your surgery. Are you having to tell them to stop sending you any more patients because you can't take them?
We have given them that information and asked them to, to either manage them themselves if they can, or to, book them in at a later date, sort of further down the week if that's needed. So yes, we're having to work with them closely.
So what do those GPs think about your service as a result?
Well, they also, a lot of those GPs work in our service, so it's a service that they work in as well. So, it's just an example of how stressed and strained the health system is at the moment.
And are GPs also having to send patients to the already extended Christchurch hospital instead?
Quite likely, yep. If we're closed, yes.
How about your staff? Are they pulling really long shifts to try and clear the backlog?
Some are, yes, absolutely, and they're going above and beyond. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got an amazing team, and we're so fortunate to have that. But we don't want to, burn them out. So that's why we're needing to close, to actually just to protect them as well, and the patients obviously. But yeah, to protect our staff as well.
Are you expecting more closures in the future?
Possibly. If we still continue with our nursing shortages, that's exactly what we're going to have to do.
So how do we avoid this from happening again? What do you need?
So we have been working very closely with Te Whatu Ora around our funding, and so those conversations are going very well, and they continue to be quite positive. So we're hopeful of a good resolution there, and then that will help us to pay the same rates as the hospital or similar, so that we don't have that big differential, and so the nurses will then be able to stay with us.
Now, the issue isn't just confined to your one surgery, is it? What are you hearing from other clinics around the country?
Well, what we're seeing is there's a big difference between nursing pay rates in hospitals compared to all sort of other primary care. So that's clinics like us, both general practices also, but also in the aged care sector and, some of the district nursing, all of those things. So where there's nurses that are not working for Te Whatu Ora, we've got this pay differential, and that's a reflection of that we've got at the moment, and we're really trying to, that's the environment we're in.
It's a bit of a worry, isn't it, that there's no 24-hour emergency clinic across Canterbury because of your closure?
Absolutely, but as I said, we're working with our system partners and, with some of those virtual options, which there are, and with, our ED partners, and we work closely with ED as well.
In a statement, Te Whatu Ora Waitaha Canterbury says Christchurch Hospital's emergency department continues to offer emergency care 24/7. It's 12 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that one. Have you had trouble accessing 24-hour clinics in your area? Text us 2101 or email checkpoint at rnz.co.nz. National Party leader Christopher Luxon had his media conference derailed by a heckler from the Freedom's New Zealand Party this afternoon. The man was hanging over a fence behind where Mr Luxon was speaking to gathered media.
Mr Luxon, we haven't seen you in Botany, part of Otara.
Sorry, mate.
We haven't seen you in Otara, Mr Luxon.
Hey, buddy, why don't we just be respectful of everyone else?
I am being respectful, Mr.
So
Luxon. We haven't seen you down in Botany at all, and
I
think you're a candidate. We would like you to.
I think you're a candidate for Vision, right?
We're part of Freedom's New Zealand, and we would like you to turn up into our communities. You are part of Botany, and Otara is part of that, and we have never seen you down there, Mr. Luxon.
Mate, so very comfortable come and talk to you afterwards. We've never seen you down there when the shootings have come past. We've never seen you down there. Hey, why don't you be a bit respectful, buddy? Because
I am being respectful.
No, we're having a conference here, and you're wanting to.
You don't listen to us, Mr. Luxon.
No, very comfortable. Come and talk to you. I'm happy. I just said to you.
Where were you in with us? Gun shootings were happening, Mr. Luxon.
The man continued.
You're saying you're the better of the two Chris's, Mr. Luxon, but where are you? You say you're the better of the real Mr. Chris Luxon.
Oh, you're a funny guy, mate. You're a real funny guy. You're no Slim Shady, buddy.
Christopher Luxon then moved his media conference inside.
Okay, sorry, we'll go inside because
Yeah, I'm asking for Mr. Luxon. Sir, I know that you're going to be the next Prime Minister, so our communities want to hold you to account, Mr. Luxon.
Once inside, Christopher Luxon says he does spend time with New Zealanders from all backgrounds.
I've actually spent quite a bit of time in Otara. I didn't get a chance to explain myself to the gentleman included, but I spent time with different community organisations, including Turn Your Life Around, a fantastic social worker organisation doing amazing work with young people, particularly Ram Raider kids. And obviously I spent time at Tangaroa College as well, a good amount of time at the school as well. So, the reality is, I think there's a way to have a discourse that's respectful. I didn't find that particularly respectful, but we're in a democracy and people are entitled to their views and how they comport and deport themselves.
Labour leader Chris Hipkins had a visit to Otara Market derailed by members of the same party, which is led by Brian Tamaki and Sue Gray. Nearly 1 million Kiwis are missing out on tens of thousands of dollars at retirement because they're failing to take advantage of Kiwisaver. A report by financial advisory service National Capital estimates half of those people were not contributing anything to the scheme, while another 500,000 were not saving enough to qualify for an annual government top-up. To explain, National Capital's Clive Fernandez joins us. Kia ora, Clive.
Hi.
So how much do people actually need to put into their Kiwisaver and how much will they get?
So it's actually quite a simple calculation. All people need to do is put $20 a week into their Kiwisaver accounts, and they will get the $521 from the government.
And do we know why people are not putting this money in?
Well, not yet. So we did a little bit of research as per our quarterly Kiwisaver value for money report, and we found out we know how many are not putting in. So we know that there are more than 1 million Kiwis who are not getting that full government contribution. Now, out of them, about 580,000 of them are getting nothing, and the remaining are getting just a partial contribution. And in total, this group of 1 million Kiwis is losing out on about $423 million per year. Now, we have spoken to people we know. We've got a few anecdotal reasons of why people might not be putting money in. There's, of course, we are undergoing a cost of living crisis. So some people do find it hard to even put in that approximately $1,000 that they need to put in to get the government contribution. Then I think there's a big cohort of people who just don't know that it exists, and if it does, they think it's quite complicated to actually go ahead and do that. And then there is also a small percentage of people, I believe, who just don't trust Kiwisaver enough. They don't trust that their money is safe in Kiwisaver, and I believe different governments tinkering around with Kiwisaver rules all the time doesn't really help that.
So this group who doesn't trust the government, is that a new thing and is that worrying? What's the reason for it?
I don't believe it's a new thing. I think we've been hearing about this mistrust in Kiwisaver right from the start. And I think one of the main reasons is people just don't trust others with their money. They are afraid that the government might change the rules on them, making Kiwisaver more inaccessible. And I think like the constant tinkering with Kiwisaver around the edges that might be leading this group of people to increase in number. Now, again, like I said, this is just anecdotal evidence, but we're hoping to spend the next few months digging down into why the million people that we have seen are not contributing, what exactly the reason is for them not contributing.
Is this lack of trust worrying?
It definitely is. Because I think, again, the lack of trust also leads to lack of engagement. For example, what we've been seeing, again, we put out an index that we call the allocation index that basically shows how Kiwis are invested in Kiwisaver. We've seen that allocation index is sitting at about 59 now, whereas ideally it needs to be 68.8. What this basically means is that Kiwis have not invested in the right way in Kiwisaver. We're being way too conservative, and this conservativeness is basically going to end up in us losing, again, as you mentioned, tens of thousands of dollars at retirement.
Clive, how can people make sure that they're actually contributing enough?
I think getting advice is very, very important, because for each of us, enough will be very, very different. It all depends on what your income is, what your goals are, how far you are from retirement. I think this advice has been inaccessible in the past, but luckily these days, because of technology and automation, the advice is becoming more and more accessible. Just as an example, someone could go to our website for example, and just submit a Kiwisaver health check, which basically lets them know exactly how much they need to save for their retirement, how much they need to contribute, and what type of fund is more suited for them.
Clive Fernandez, thank you very much. RNZ National, you're with Checkpoint, and it is now 20 minutes past 5. Kia ora e te iwi. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can also tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now it's time for the headlines with Karen.
Thanks, Susanna. Christchurch's only 24-hour doctor's surgery is closed until midnight amid 4 doctors calling in sick and general staff shortages. Pickers's Health's Madras Street Clinic was in a similar situation on Saturday. General Manager Lisa Brennan told Checkpoint staff were going above and beyond to get on top of the backlog, and managers were in talks with Te Whatu Ora to raise pay. National leader Mr Luxon says he does spend time with people from all backgrounds after a heckler from Vision New Zealand accused him of not visiting poorer communities. This afternoon's intervention forced Mr Luxon to move a media conference in Pakuranga in Auckland indoors. He says he supports people's right to protest but disagrees with both the protesters' comments and approach. A report by financial advisory service National Capital estimates 500,000 people are not taking part in Kiwisaver, while another 500,000 are not saving enough to get an annual government top-up. The government's tightening its belt amid a deteriorating global economy and tax revenue that's $2 billion less than expected. It says it's found nearly $4 billion in savings across the public service over the next 4 years, including cutting consultants and contractors. And the Ministry of Health is reporting a total of 3,484 new COVID-19 cases over the past 7 days, a drop of more than 450 on the previous week. There have been 22 further deaths and 157 people are in hospital, 2 of them in ICU. On the traffic front, a serious crash on State Highway 1 in Otago between Waihola and Titri has been causing issues. The road was closed and the police serious crash unit is on the scene. There's a detour, 3 people reported injured. And on State Highway 2 Tauranga, the Eastern Link in the Bay of Plenty, plan ahead for 3 nights of overnight full closures of the TL toll road in Tauranga from tonight, 8 o'clock tonight till 6 in the morning. That's Monday through Wednesday in both directions. A detour via Te Puke Highway will be required. We'll have more news headlines and any traffic updates for you around 20 to 6.
Well, the odds were stacked against New Zealand race driver Liam Lawson in today's Formula One race in the Netherlands. After getting a late call-up, Lawson had to fight from the back of the grid in his debut race. However, the 21-year-old made the racing world take notice when he finished just outside the points at the Dutch Grand Prix. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Kia ora, Felicity.
Kia ora.
So, Liam Lawson, how did he get his F1 start exactly?
Well, it's a bit of a rarity to see a New Zealander on the Formula One grid. Lawson becomes just the 10th driver to achieve that. The last person to do it was Brendan Hartley in 2018. So we've been waiting a while for this, but actually Lawson got his opportunity today with AlphaTauri because their normal driver, Australian Daniel Ricciardo, actually crashed during practice and broke his hand, which means he had to go to surgery, but he also couldn't drive the car. So Liam Lawson's been on the radar. He's contracted to Red Bull, who oversee AlphaTauri. So he's been a driver that they've used before. He's a test and reserve driver for that team. So he's kind of always known that this is a possibility to get the call up for this kind of racing. He's also not sitting idle. He normally races in Super Formula, an open wheel category in Japan. So he's been doing that, but today he was just kind of a little bit thrown in the deep end there. He didn't have the best of qualifying, as you sort of said there. He had to start from the back of the grid and it was wet conditions. So it was a little bit of a tricky one to be thrown in there as well. But he started from the back and did enough to get through to 13th. Which
amazing.
Will have impressed the bosses there as well because he finished 3 places ahead of his teammate Yuki Tsunoda. But Lawson said driving conditions were difficult, but he's better off for the experience.
Just happy to get through the race, honestly. There's definitely some work to do. I'm glad to have done it now, to be able to learn from this and take this forwards. Hopefully I get the opportunity to drive again and then I can use everything I learned today for that. So looking back, now that we had all the mixed conditions, it's probably good for me to have gone through that.
And for that opportunity there as well, we don't know when he's going to drive again. So Ricciardo, that injury is a little bit unclear as to when he'll be back in the car, but there is a potential for Liam Lawson to be driving as soon as next week in Monza at the Italian Grand Prix.
And plus we know his name now, right?
Exactly.
Fantastic. Now, I mean, it's been a weekend of sport.
It has.
Paddler Dame Lisa Carrington she is continuing to dominate at the World Champs. Tell us more.
Yeah, so this morning she won in the K1 200 at the World Champs in Germany. So this is actually quite a dominant win. She won by more than a second over an Australian paddler, but it's the 9th time that she's actually won that event. So quite a dominant on the world stage to be racing in that, but it's also her 15th world title. She picked up 3 of those over the weekend, including in the K4. So it hasn't just been all about her as an individual. And Canoe Racing New Zealand's high performance manager, Nathan Luce, he says her performances just continue to impress.
She never ceases to amaze with how she approaches her individual performances, but also how much, heart and soul and energy she puts into the team. And so Lisa's leadership really came into focus.
And so, they have been relying on her as a little bit of a team leader as they bring through some of these younger paddlers. But it's actually been quite a successful World Champs for New Zealand. They've qualified 4 women's events for the Paris Olympics next year.
It's brilliant. Felicity, thank you so much. Patients with life-limiting conditions say New Zealand is lagging behind other OECD countries when it comes to funding new and breakthrough medicines. The group My Life Matters represents more than 1 million patients with conditions such as cancer and diabetes. And this morning, they got together in Auckland to protest for more medicine access equity. Raisa Almeida has more.
In 2018, Pauline was diagnosed with a brain tumour. She had surgery the next day and access to funded medicine for the first 3 months.
I found the first 3 months, which is the acute treatment, brilliant. However, after the 3 months, you're left on your own.
Pauline had to pay in full for the rest of her entire treatment, a sum of hundreds of thousands of dollars. She says going to Australia, where the treatment is already fully funded, has been the choice for many in her position.
I do have a number of friends out there who do have brain tumours. They have to pay for their costs, even though it may be funded, the same medication may be funded in Australia. maybe funded in America.
The group My Life Matters represents patients with cancers, rare disorders, diabetes and other life-limiting conditions. This morning, 20 organisations gathered in Auckland to protest for more equitable access to medicine. Patient Voice Aotearoa Chair Malcolm Moreland says medicine access in New Zealand is nearing that on third world countries.
What we really want to see is a firm commitment to significantly bolstering Pharmac's budget. We know that it's not fit for purpose. We've seen multiple reports come out and say that we're at the bottom of the OECD.
He says as of April, there were 1,092 applications waiting for funding from Pharmac. Some drugs are on the waitlist for more than 7.5 years. Crohn's and Colitis New Zealand Chief Executive Belinda Brown was in the protest and says the drug buyer agency should keep up with overseas trends.
We've just had 2 new ones funded, but they're now old technology. There's new medicines coming all the time. So we think it's really important that your patients are kept out of hospital and given medication so there's less burden on our healthcare system.
An independent review last year found systemic failings with Pharmac, and in a long list of recommendations asked the agency to ensure equitable access to medicine. Mrs Brown questioned Pharmac's ability to follow what was recommended.
I'd like to see, Pharmac's budget doubled. I'd like to see them held accountable for some of those recommendations that were made in the review. We spent all this money as a government. What have they actually done with those recommendations?
CEO of the Prostate Cancer Foundation, Peter Dickens, was also at the protest. He says patients' quality of life is being affected by the lack of up-to-date funded medication.
We're really worried about the medicines crisis in New Zealand, particularly for prostate cancer patients. There hasn't been a new therapeutic funded in almost 10 years. Overseas, we're about 2 generations of medicines ahead.
Mr Dickens says New Zealand's falling behind, and political parties need to relook at Pharmac's structure.
It's very clear that the way that we go about funding medicines is broken, and what we really need the parties to do is to sit down and have a really good look at the Pharmac model and change it. New Zealand per capita funds medicines at an incredibly low level. We're at the bottom of the OECD. Something has to change because people are dying as a result.
Pharmac says it's working hard to timely address all recommendations made by the review, and the progress is available on its website.
It's 5:30. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Time for the business news with Nona Peltier. Nona, greetings. Let's start with fast food operator Restaurant Brands' half-year profit. It slumped.
Yeah, it really slumped.
Why? What happened?
Well, they have. It was well signaled to the market, so it wasn't exactly a surprise. But the net profit fell 85%. That was more than, well, I guess they would have liked that. So their profit was $2.2 million. Now you think about that on revenue of $640 million. That's not a very big profit. And the main reason was higher input costs. So it's the ingredients, just like everybody else going to the grocery store, their ingredients also had cost more. But their margins shrank, and that's their profit margin on their, whatever it is, because they have Pizza Hut, Carl's Jr., they've got KFC, and Taco Bell. So the thing is, these are fast food and the pricing counts. So they weren't able to really hike up the prices to cover those costs. So their margins shrunk, as did their profits. And so that's why they ended up with that. The market wasn't too upset about it, though. The share price barely moved.
Interesting. Okay, Mighty Ape, it's launched a new mobile service. What is it?
So do you know what Mighty Ape is?
To be honest with you, I don't, but I'm,
Well, I can't say I really knew either, but they are an online retail outlet and have like 700,000 customers listed. Well, who knew? But anyway, so they decided that they're going to offer a mobile service called Mighty Mobile, so like Mighty Ape. But it's running off of the One New Zealand, which used to be Vodafone network. And so they are a retail mobile service. They basically compete with One New Zealand, but are using their network. They're bringing in new packages that New Zealanders have not seen before, unlimited data, but really unlimited data, with packages starting from $40 a month. So I spoke with the chief executive after a really energetic press conference today. I have to say, lots of clapping and cheering. They had like race cars showing the difference between their different speeds that they offer. So, yeah, good luck to them. It's not an easy market to break into. And I spoke with the chief executive of the Tech Users Association, and he said, well, it's a tough nut to crack. Let's hope the mighty monkey can make it happen. I don't know.
What's happening on the markets today? Or what has happened, more to the point?
Well, the top 50 index, it rose a whole 11 points to 11,479. That's better than going down, right? Mm-hmm. The dollar also perked up a little bit after being in a slump this morning, I thought. It was below 59 US cents, which is pretty low. At 59, so it finished up at 59.2 US cents, 92 Australian, 46.9 pence. And there you go.
There you have it, Nona. Thank you very much. New research shows we're not as switched on as we should be when it comes to technology, warning us of earthquakes. Massey's Joint Centre for Disaster Research surveyed more than 3,000 people following 2 earthquakes that triggered Android earthquake alerts on Android phones. They found Kiwis didn't know much about the warning systems or how to respond to them. Lead author of the research, Lauren Vanel, joins me now. Kia ora, Lauren.
Kia ora.
What exactly are earthquake early warning systems and Android earthquake alerts?
Yeah, so Android earthquake early warning is essentially rapid detection. So it's not predicting an earthquake. What it is it's detecting shaking really rapidly, and then the Android system sends out alerts to Android smartphones to let the users know that they can expect shaking soon.
So how does the system help us exactly?
The idea is that if we can give people a few seconds of warning that strong shaking is about to arrive, they can use those seconds to protect themselves so that they're less likely to be injured during that shaking.
So it's literally a kind of heads up. So how are people responding?
Yeah, so we found that people responded to these particular alerts mostly by looking for more information or telling people around them, which makes sense given that this was a novel system that hadn't really been communicated to the public, so people didn't really know what it was they had just received and what they were supposed to do.
And was this result surprising given we've had so much experience with earthquakes?
It wasn't all that surprising. We do obviously have a lot of experience with earthquakes in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but earthquake early warning is a very new thing. So at this time, it had only been a few months since Google launched their system in New Zealand, and we don't currently have an official national system in New Zealand. So it's not surprising that the public aren't, clued up that much on earthquake early warning.
Was there anything else in the data that surprised you?
Yeah, it was a little bit surprising to see that only about a quarter to a third of people in our survey knew that the alert they received had come from Google. There's a lot of people who thought it came from the GNS or GeoNet or the National Emergency Management Agency. But it's really important that people know that this isn't an official system. It's not linked to GNS or GeoNet in any way.
Should New Zealand have a national system?
That's a really big question that a lot of us are working quite hard to answer at the moment because, as I'm sure you can imagine, there are lots of pieces of the puzzle, so it would cost a lot of money, and we also have to make sure that if we do have a system, we can have the communication and education around it so that people know what it is and how to use it, because if people don't know how to respond, it could potentially do more harm than good.
Now, you've carried out a lot of research into preparedness and responses to earthquakes. Are we becoming complacent?
I don't think we're becoming complacent. I mean, it's a challenge sometimes talking to people about earthquakes in New Zealand because, there are just so many other challenges that people face day to day. But we do see, for example, that more people now know that drop, cover and hold is the right thing to do during an earthquake shaking than they did when I started doing this research 8 or 9 years ago. So I think people are getting better.
And do you think that New Zealanders are ready for when the Alpine fault ruptures?
I think ready is not a yes we are or no we aren't. I think we could always be more prepared for things like that, but there's a lot of great work being done to get people more prepared, and we are getting better.
Lauren, what's your message to people about being prepared or getting prepared?
One of my messages would be to not put it off. If you can do something small today, then that's better than nothing. And preparing will actually help. It is a good thing to do. It's a good use of your time.
Lauren Vanel, Joint Centre for Disaster Research Lecturer, thank you very much. The Labour government has found nearly $4 billion in savings across the public service over the next 4 years. It comes as the government's accounts for the 11 months to the end of May show tax take was $2 billion lower than expected. The government is treating the $4 billion as savings and won't be making it available for new spending. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the savings will come from cuts to public agency spending, a reduction in budget allowances and operational and capital savings.
I want to be very clear that the level of savings that we have identified here go as far as we can do in good conscience to meet the balance and protect frontline services. Going further would start to undermine the investments in public services that have been made and those that are needed to support New Zealanders.
The Labour government has also directed public agencies to reduce the amount spent on consultants and contractors. Grant Robertson expects this would save about $165 million every year. He says this is not an admission the government has spent too much on consultants and contractors.
No, it's not. In fact, as I said when I spoke earlier, we had actually began the path of bringing expenditure on consultants and contractors down until we hit the COVID period. What this does tell us is that we have to work very hard now as that expenditure goes out of the government's books to make sure that we bring that contractor expenditure down.
That was the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson. It is coming up to 20 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora e te iwi. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now it's time for the headlines with Karen.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the government has not spent too much on consultants and contractors, despite telling public agencies to cut back on them in the expectation of saving $165 million a year. That's part of $4 billion in government savings over the next 4 years amid a faltering global economy and a tax take that's $2 billion less than forecast. National says the government has finally admitted it has a spending problem. A police report leaked to the New Zealand Herald claims offenders are wrapping tinfoil around electronic monitoring devices to disable them, then going out and committing crimes. Ruth Money, a victims advocate, says that provides a safety concern, particularly when violent offenders are given home detention. For the last 63 years, Auckland's Tamaki has been a true blue seat. But for the first time ever, ACT is hoping to win, with its deputy leader, Brooke Van Velden, taking on National's Simon O'Connor. ACT says the two are neck and neck. 3 people have life-threatening injuries following a crash in Otago this afternoon. Emergency services were called to the 2-vehicle crash on State Highway 1 near Waihola about 15:15 midday. And filmmakers Sir Peter Jackson and Dame Fran Walsh are gifting $2 million to help fit out the basement of Wellington's Town Hall with state-of-the-art recording equipment and rehearsal spaces. The building is said to have excellent acoustics. Looking at the traffic, as we mentioned, on State Highway 2 Tauranga, the Eastern Link, there'll be overnight closures for the next 3 nights. Full closures of the toll road in Tauranga from 8 at night till 6 in the morning, Monday to Wednesday in both directions. A detour via Te Puke Highway will be required. We'll have more news at 6.
Time for some feedback now, and this is in response to Christchurch's 24-hour surgery having to close early, reduce its hours a couple of times the past 2 days, including tonight because of staff shortages. Here's a text: after hours was also closed on Thursday when we went. Doors were closed and couldn't get through to Healthline. Sickness, including COVID, is ripping through Canterbury School, says one texter. It's difficult during the exam period. And I had a fall early evening and fractured my ankle. Ambulance said they couldn't get to see me for up to 3 hours, and Thames Hospital would have up to an hour wait time. I live in Waihi, so waited to talk with local doctors this afternoon. And on the subject of Kiwisaver, where would I ever get $20 a week, says Harry, skipping the power, rent or food. Stop feeding the kids. After rent, there isn't $20 left. And Tony's texted, perhaps some people think that if the Greens are part of the government, Kiwisaver will be subject to their wealth confiscation tax. This texter says, Kiwisaver, there was an age cut-off at the beginning. And a question, or a series of questions, how many of the Kiwis not paying the $20 a week or $1,000+ a year are children who had accounts set up by their parents? My understanding is they don't become eligible for the $520 government top-up until they are working for themselves. And we've had an answer to that. They're not included in the data. It's working age people who have been counted. No one under the age of 18 or over 65 is included in that research. And this other texter says, I was one who could not afford to put $20 into Kiwisaver per week because I worked 2 poorly paid part-time jobs and therefore paid secondary tax, which left me with very little to live on week to week. I wrote to all relevant MPs about this very matter in 2018. Thank you all very much for your feedback. Keep it coming. Texts 2101, emails at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Political football or a threat to people's safety? Some of the sentiments over a leaked police report into the number of people disabling their electronic ankle bracelets with tinfoil. The police report, leaked to the New Zealand Herald, says people are wrapping tinfoil around the devices to disable them, then going out and committing crimes. Crystal Gibbons reports.
The report details how one offender attempted a stabbing while youth committed ram raids after disabling their ankle bracelets. It comes as no surprise to victim advocate Ruth Money.
Everybody thinks that corrections are monitoring the GPS 24/7 in real time with many, many resources able to swing into action, but it simply isn't the case, and we see that time and time again with people who are absconding. So the system is under-resourced, as well as the fact that you can easily foil the system by literally putting tinfoil around the bracelet.
She says she's seeing more offenders being given home detention, much to the concern of victims.
So victims have a real concern, and have had for many years now, a level of concern around how safe they are when particularly violent offenders are given home detention-based sentences.
But a justice advocate says the leaked report amounts to nothing more than political footballing. Just Speak Executive Director Epiphany Fuatawa says it only focuses on one region and political parties should not be making policy from that.
Rather, what we should be focusing on is developing responsible policy and focusing on the drivers of harm and crime, because then we might actually see changes and decreases in numbers.
Police National Assistant Commissioner Naila Hassan says the report was meant for an internal audience and was not intended to portray a national view of the situation. She says it's not unusual for police to produce internal documents on emerging risks.
It's then for us as an organisation to look at those risks that are identified and be able to work through processes and manage those risks.
The number of people on electronic monitoring has increased from 510 in 2018 to 2,345 people in the June quarter. Corrections National Commissioner Lee Marsh says the tamper rate with bracelets is as low as it's ever been, at about 1.4% for July.
Yes, the overall number has increased, but it has increased in line with the overall population increasing. The reality, though, is those that are caught, there's a range of reasons that a bracelet could be tampered with, but those that are caught are held to account and are put before the court.
Mr Marsh says police are called as soon as they identify that an Ian Bale bracelet has been tampered with.
It's coming up to 13 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Schools are increasingly turning to new ways of recruiting teachers in order to meet demand amid a long-running teacher shortage. On-the-job training programs allow aspiring teachers who already have a degree to spend a year working at a school with minimal time spent on campus, sort of like an apprenticeship. Their fees are covered and they're able to earn a small salary, so it's proving popular among graduates who don't fancy another year at uni. Luca Foreman has more.
After years studying in the humanities and obtaining a master's in philosophy, Kieran McAlpine taught a short course to high school students. It had just been a way to make ends meet, but she found that she loved it.
I realised that actually I think I might like to become a teacher, so teaching was not part of the original plan, but it's been a really happy result.
Around the same time, she heard about the Auckland Schools teacher training program and decided to give it a go, obtaining a placement at Westlake Boys High School. She says the practical nature of the program made the experience invaluable.
There's stuff that you just can't learn in theory, when you're dealing with young people every day in terms of little behaviour management strategies and just, the administration of the job and managing a classroom. It just, you can't match it.
While learning on the job, trainees are still required to complete university papers, but they can do this remotely, and they still end up with a teaching diploma. Their uni fees are covered, and the school pays them a stipend to cover their living costs while they work at the school. Westlake Boys High principal David Ferguson says the success of the Auckland Schools teacher training program speaks for itself.
The 45, 46 that qualified in the first 2 years, every single one of them ended up working in the school who trained them, apart from one who relocated to a different city and picked up a job there anyway.
It's the school's responsibility to support the teachers through the year and make sure they're getting the help they need. Mr Ferguson says 80% of those doing the program this year have switched from a different career, and most of them wouldn't have been interested in going back to uni.
Knowing that they probably would never have found their way into teaching had it not been for this program, it just makes it feel like we're really onto something.
Mr Ferguson says they're aiming for a 50% increase in the number of trainees doing the course next year. Acting President of the Post-Primary Teachers Association, Chris Abercrombie, says it supports school-based training, but has some concerns around equity for rural and lower decile schools.
Having the staffing ability to be able to manage these programs within the schools, having the individuals that want to be involved. So those are our main concerns around equity. That it doesn't appear that lower decile schools have access to this.
One lower decile school that is a part of these programs is James Cook High School in South Auckland. It's a part of the Auckland Schools program, as well as another called Teach First. Principal Grant McMillan says they're a big help in overcoming the shortage of qualified teachers.
They're making a huge difference, and they are helping us get different people in different stages of their life into teaching.
He says training quality teachers has never been more important, with the shortages expected to get worse.
If we have the shortages that the ministry projected 18 months ago, it would mean that about 1 in 9 or 1 in 10 secondary schools would have absolutely no teachers in it at all.
Grant McMillan says these programs aren't going to replace traditional teacher training, but it's good to give aspiring teachers options.
Across the Tasman now, where more Australians than ever before are at risk of mortgage stress, topping records set during the global financial crisis in 2008. The number of Australians a month or more behind on their mortgage repayments is also rising. The new data paints a grim picture of the country's cost of living crisis. The ABC's Catherine Diss reports.
This one? Yay! Yeah!
Cody Briggs and his partner Monique McHale are raising their son Oliver in Perth's southeastern suburbs. They're trying to build their dream home. But the past 12 interest rate rises have pushed them to the edge.
It wouldn't take much at all to drop us into the red, sort of just running that line right now as it is. It wouldn't take much.
Squeezed between a tight rental market, construction delays and cost blowouts, the young couple opted to buy another home when Oliver was born. 70% of their income is now going towards their mortgages.
I am pretty stressed. I try not to think about it because better to be ignorant and not think about it than face the reality that, we might not make the next progress payment.
Over the past year, the number of Australians that have fallen behind a month or more in their mortgage repayments has increased in every state and territory. Parts of Victoria, New South Wales, Tasmania, the NT and the outback regions of WA and Queensland are feeling most of the pain. The new data from ratings agency S&P Global found Queensland's outback recorded the worst arrears in the country at 3.64%, followed by Tasmania's southeast, Shepparton in northern Victoria, WA's outback, Darwin in the Northern Territory and Sydney's southwest. S&P Global analyst Erin Kitson predicts mortgage defaults will continue to rise, but says Australia's one saving grace, it's low unemployment.
At this point, we expect arrears to continue to increase until certainly into the first half of next year. But I think really importantly when it comes to arrears, the employment story is key.
More Australians than ever before are at risk of mortgage stress. The latest Roy Morgan research shows 1.5 million borrowers are at risk, a number higher than the global financial crisis in 2008. The company's CEO, Michelle Levine, is predicting more pain. She says she'll be watching the jobless rate closely.
The real impact is if someone loses their job, their income disappears or gets halved if 1 out of 2 lose their job. So really, unemployment is going to be something to keep an eye on.
It's a problem social worker Gabby Glass feels every day. She's experiencing mortgage stress while also seeing a growing number of people reaching out for help in her regional town of Castlemaine, northwest of Melbourne.
Income would be going backwards if I wasn't working the 2 jobs, or if my car blew up, or if my old house, the roof blew off in a storm or something like that. An unexpected thing like that would send me backwards.
The National Debt Helpline has recorded an almost 30% increase in the number of calls on the same time last year. Victoria was disproportionately higher, recording a 44% jump, while those visiting the helpline's website has almost doubled over the past year.
Yay, clapping!
Back in WA, Cody and Monique haven't yet had to reach out for help, but they fear how long they'll be able to hold on.
You work so hard to get this and to get everything you have, and then you sort of just have to potentially throw it away and end up in a worse position than you were when you started.
To South Australia, a homegrown exercise program is getting farmers off the tractor and into the gym. The group, calling itself the Fat Farmers, has branches across the state and is now spreading interstate. The idea is to encourage farmers to band together to improve strength, fitness and flexibility. And it's delivering results not just for physical but also mental health. The ABC's Sally Sarah reports.
It's just before dawn and the Fat Farmers are already working out. The group began here in the South Australian town of Maitland in 2010. Ben Wondersits is one of the originals.
We were just rural men that probably weren't looking after ourselves. Initially it probably started with our wives saying we were snoring. And that prompted a bit of conversation and obviously a bit of a check-up at the doctor, and my doctor told me to lose some weight. And he was probably right.
Back then, hardly any men used the local gym. It was regarded as a place where women worked out. So the Fat Farmers needed to find a way to get the blokes to exercise.
We would have a barbecue on the footpath outside the gym, which seems an unusual way to attract people. But that's what we did, and we'd bring in a few old cars and now we've turned that around and there's sort of 40 or 50 blokes coming to the gym and it's just now normal.
All right, so we'll do a minute, 10 lunges.
Now the farmers train 2 mornings a week with gym instructor George Davies.
Right. So now we're doing the air bike, which I reckon is the hardest thing in here, this bike. Farming is a lot of sitting down now, so it's like truckies and on tractors. Your core switches off quite a bit, so if we can just keep a bit of that strength going, it's going to make things a lot easier from work-wise, yeah. What's your speed down the bottom?
Young Maitland farmer and dad, Hamish Bubner, has congenital heart disease. But for him, coming to the gym is not just about getting fit, it's a chance to check in with his mates.
In an industry where we work by ourselves a lot, like most of us are all farmers.
20 sit-ups. Okay, very good.
The fat farmers have several groups across South Australia and are now expanding elsewhere. Ben Wondersit says the name has stuck.
Somehow we titled ourselves as the fat farmers because that's what we were, and although it's not politically correct, and we've just started chipping away, getting more groups throughout the state, now a few interstate.
That doesn't happen always, that's only because you're here, Sally.
As rates of obesity and mental health issues remain high in regional Australia, this community-based initiative is changing behaviour one step at a time.
It's quite bizarre that that our gym's actually across the road from the pub, and 15 years ago you'd go through town and if you saw someone's ute there you'd know they're at the pub, whereas now it's a bit hard to guess because we've sort of, in a way, we've crossed the road.
Now, there's a warning on this next one. If rats and mice are definitely not your thing, pause. One of the world's biggest tourist attractions has been forced to clean up its act after being overrun in parts by rodents. Visitors have been posting videos of rats roaming around the Colosseum in Rome, and the numbers are reported to be on the rise. Here's the BBC's Stephanie Price.
Welcome to Roma. Italian rats.
One of many videos on TikTok posted by visitors to the Colosseum showing large rats scurrying across the ground, running over visitors' feet and getting into their bags.
Eating some food, and we brought this bag with us, but what we didn't know is that there are rats. Look at the holes. Look at the holes.
It's become such an issue that officials launched a special intervention over the weekend, bringing in extra cleaning staff, laying traps and clearing out the drains that the rats emerge from. The city government said there are an estimated 7 million rats in central Rome, or 2.5 for every inhabitant. But it says a surge of visitors this summer, combined with the heatwave, have created conditions that have drawn the rodents into the Colosseum and surrounding area. Namely, lots of leftover food and piles of rubbish. Built 2,000 years ago, the Colosseum was the biggest amphitheatre in the Roman Empire and attracts around 6 million visitors every year.
I would not want Roman ratty in my bag. Just saying. We've just got a moment for some news before some texts, for some feedback before the news. Earthquakes. Why on earth would we trust Google with quake warnings that aren't linked to GNS or any other New Zealand agency with actual responsibility in the civil defence area? And regarding ankle bracelets, seems pretty simple. If the ankle bracelets lose sync for any reason, go directly to jail. Do not go past go. Do not collect $200. Problem solved. And before anyone gets upset, remember, these people are criminals. They should have lost all their rights when they offended against society. More on the earthquakes. If NEMA is really wanting us to survive a major earthquake or even a lesser one, public education on where to shelter and when should be the first priority. I know because I was a public education officer, PEO, years ago.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Karen McCarthy. The Finance Minister is adamant the Labour government has not spent too much on consultants and contractors. Grant Robertson has directed public agencies to reduce the spend on such workers, which he expects will save about $165 million every year. That money forms part of the $4 billion in savings the Labour government has announced across the public sector. Mr Robertson says the direction is not an admission the government spent too much.
No, it's not. In fact, as I said when I spoke earlier, we had actually began the path of bringing expenditure on consultants and contractors down until we hit the COVID period. What this does tell us is that we have to work very hard now as that expenditure goes out of the government's books to make sure that we bring that contractor expenditure down.
The savings announced today are on top of the $4 billion in savings announced in May. Christchurch's only 24-hour doctor's surgery says a combination of high demand and staff sickness forced it to close early today. Pegasus Health's Madras Street clinic shut up shop at 3:30 this afternoon, the latest in a run of closures. General Manager of Patient and Provider Services Lisa Brennan told Checkpoint they have an ongoing nursing shortage, but today demand and staff illness pushed them over the edge.
Mondays are particularly high demand, so definitely Mondays are worse than other days.
But yeah, it's a combination of all of those things, high demand and staffing.
Lisa Brennan says Pegasus Health is working with Te Whatu Ora for more funding so it can pay its nurses a salary comparable to hospital nurses. Christchurch Hospital's emergency department remains open 24 hours. Tokyo is warning its citizens in China to lay low as anti-Japanese sentiment builds in the country over Japan's release of nuclear wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. China has placed a blanket ban on all seafood from Japan in response to the discharge, which it calls selfish and harmful. Our correspondent Chris Gilbert reports.
Japan's concerned about the resentment building in China. Rocks and eggs have been thrown at Japanese schools, and there have been calls for more protests and aggravation against Japan's embassy on Chinese social media. It's forced the embassy to beef up security. Tokyo is now calling on any Japanese citizens in China to keep a low profile, including not speaking Japanese loudly or excessively, staying vigilant around Japanese schools and embassies, to stay away from protests, and to generally lay low. There are also reports of nuisance phone calls from China to Japanese numbers. Tokyo is demanding Beijing step in and request its people to remain calm.
The opposition leader in Zimbabwe is accusing President Emmerson Mnangagwa of carrying out a coup following Wednesday's election. Mr Mnangagwa insists the vote was fair, but his opponent, Nelson Chamisa, describes the official results as a sham.
We stand here in the aftermath of a highly contested election, of an election that poll observers have rightly described as an election that is so damaged in reputation and that is so fraudulent.
Government officials insist President Mnangagwa won the poll with nearly 53% of the vote and have dismissed any criticism. A victims advocate says a rising number of home detention sentences is leaving victims concerned for their safety. This is particularly in light of a police report leaked to the New Zealand Herald, which says people are wrapping tinfoil around the devices to disable them, then going out and committing crimes. Ruth Money says that's a safety concern, particularly when violent offenders are given home detention sentences.
Everybody thinks that corrections are monitoring the GPS 24/7 in real time with many resources able to swing into action, but it simply isn't the case, and we see that time and time again with people who are absconding.
Ruth Money says not only is the system under-resourced, but with people able to subvert it using tinfoil, it's also not fit for purpose. Schools are increasingly turning to new ways of recruiting teachers amid a long-running teacher shortage. On-the-job training programs allow aspiring teachers who already have a degree to spend a year working at a school with minimal time spent on campus, somewhat like an apprenticeship. Karen McAlpine is a graduate of the program and says the practical skills she's learned have given her a head start in her career.
There's stuff that you just can't learn in theory, when you're dealing with young people every day in terms of little behaviour management strategies and just, the administration of the job and managing a classroom.
However, acting president of the Post-Primary Teachers Association, Chris Abercrombie, says it has some concerns about whether these programs are equitable for rural and lower decile schools. Almost 70 homeowners in the West Auckland suburb of Muriwai have finally heard which category their storm-damaged properties fall into. It's been 6 months since they had to leave their homes without notice and have been unable to return. 24 homes are in Category 3, qualifying them for the buyout scheme. 3 are in Category 2. 41 are still in limbo, being classed as Category 2/3. Mace Ward from Auckland Council says it's still to be determined whether engineering work could reduce the risk at these properties. Site visits are expected in September. Other parts of the city are still undergoing site assessments before categories can be assigned. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, rising insurance costs are forcing some councils to leave community assets to the mercy of the elements. What the stress physiology of marine animals tells us about their homes. Cybersecurity engineer Denise Carter-Bennett on ethical hacking and encouraging more women and more neurodiverse people into the sector. And veterinarian Dr Kat Littlewood discusses how to be safe around animals, particularly dogs. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Back to Checkpoint with Susana Leia Tawa after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland, cloudy periods and isolated showers, long fine spells tomorrow. Auckland to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. 1 or 2 showers, clearing and becoming fine, morning frosts tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Manawatu to Wellington, cloudy with a few showers, gradually clearing, becoming fine tomorrow with frosts in the morning. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Canterbury, mainly fine with morning frosts. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, a few showers about the southern coasts, mainly fine elsewhere. Showers becoming widespread in Fiordland and Southland this evening and isolated showers developing in Otago. And the Chatham Islands, showers clearing tomorrow evening. It's 6:07.
No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint. I'm Susana Leia-Tawa in for Lisa Owen. For the last 63 years, Auckland's Tamaki electorate has been a true blue seat, a mere tap-in for National. But the ACT Party believes that incumbent MP Simon O'Connor is on shaky political ground. He's a mere footnote on National's party list at 54, while his ultra-conservative views on abortion, same-sex marriage and euthanasia have some constituents looking elsewhere for their representative in Parliament. Enter ACT Party Deputy Leader Brooke Van Velden, young, female, socially liberal and with significant resources being poured into her campaign. She's seen as having a genuine chance of turning Tamaki yellow. Our reporter Louise Tenuth visited both candidates on the campaign trail just 7 weeks out from the election.
Edged by Auckland's sparkling eastern bays, the Tamaki electorate includes affluent suburbs like St Heliers, Kohimarama, Mission Bay and Meadowbank, as well as the working-class Glen Innes. Staunch monarchist and former Roman Catholic chaplain Simon O'Connor has held the seat for 12 years. Just off the main drag in the bustling seaside suburb of St Heliers, I catch up with Mr O'Connor after his morning knocking on doors in Mission Bay and visiting 2 local schools.
My wife finds it out too. You can't stop to get a coffee because then there's all these people that want to stop and chat.
So what are the biggest issues for people in the area?
Cost of living is first and foremost. People are finding it very, very tough. Crime's a big one. So you've got those. And of course health, education. I think generally people are finding that services are declining.
Before politics, Mr O'Connor was a Roman Catholic chaplain and trained to become a priest. He's voted against legalising same-sex marriage, decriminalising abortion and opposed the end-of-life choice bill.
I voted against the marriage changes because I think it's a very particular definition. That's the first statement. The second is there's a whole lot of different relationships and I'm very comfortable with that, and certainly in the community here I think I've got a very good relationship with our LGBTQI community, often helping them out with different things, doing some immigration, even some surrogacy work at the moment.
According to the latest census data from 2018, there are around 3,000 more women in the Tamaki electorate than there are men. Will Mr O'Connor's controversial views alienate the majority of his constituents?
My views on abortion are very well known. I'm a pro-life advocate.
For him, this definition is far-reaching.
So it doesn't matter if it's abortion, euthanasia, the death penalty, I'm opposed to it.
He was forced to apologise after posting "Today is a good day" with a heart emoji on social media after the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v Wade, a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. But he says he treats women who have made what he calls different choices with kindness and care. Do you stand by your comments made on social media?
I think it was the appropriate political decision of the American Constitution. I mean, ultimately, it sent back responsibility to the state. It was the right decision.
As for whether he thinks his religious beliefs will affect his popularity, he says that's up to the voters.
I don't think he's ever going to recover from me after that stupid comment he made about abortion, so anyone but him.
Not him, and not the other two either, so...
I'd never vote National. I vote Labour, always.
This is an electorate where it almost always returns Simon, just, I guess, because of the affluent makeup of the area.
Yes, no, I'm a very big fan of Simon O'Connor. He's done a lot in our community.
I love flowers, yes, thank you.
There you go, thank you.
Down the road at St Heliers Library, the ACT Party's Brooke Van Velden is out fundraising for Daffodil Day. She says people want more from their next government.
Crime
People do not feel safe on our streets. I'm hearing real concerns about our economy and whether or not it's going to thrive in the next few years, or whether people's children will move overseas, or whether they themselves are threatening to move overseas.
The party strongly opposes co-governance and wants to change the country's constitutional settings, reducing the power of titiriti or waitangi. It doesn't take long before the issue is brought up by a local coming to make a Daffodil Day donation.
Are you anti-co-governance?
Yeah, I am. Where's your main concern lie?
Well, that everything is completely Maorified now. Right through every system that we have, and if they have control, then we don't have control.
Ms Van Velden says people want change.
People don't feel like they've had a local voice that's representing them in Parliament. It has felt like Tamaki has been underserved. There hasn't been choice around here for 63 years.
When not campaigning, Simon O'Connor says you'll find him pottering in the garden or walking with his wife. Brooke Van Velden says she'll be down at the tennis courts, letting off steam. While there's been no public polling for the Tamaki electorate, ACT insists its internal surveys have National and ACT neck and neck. It's certainly going to be a race to watch as we head to election day.
Russian investigators say genetic testing has confirmed Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was killed when his plane crashed northwest of Moscow last week. Russia's investigative committee says all 10 bodies recovered at the crash site match the names on the passenger list. The ABC's Steve Kinane reports.
After leading a failed mutiny in Russia just 2 months ago, Yevgeny Prigozhin was living on borrowed time. Being labelled a traitor by Vladimir Putin meant he was a marked man, no matter what kind of deal he thought he had with the president. Now, Svetlana Petrenko, a spokesperson for Russia's investigative committee, has released a statement claiming its investigation had proven that Prigozhin's body was amongst the ashes at the crash site.
As part of the investigation of the plane crash in the Tver region, molecular genetic examinations have been completed. According to their results, the identities of all 10 dead were established. They correspond to the list stated in the flight sheet.
The announcement is unlikely to put the matter to rest. Kurt Volker, the former US ambassador to NATO, says it's hard to believe anything that comes out of an investigation conducted by the Russian state.
We cannot trust anything that the Russians release as fact. They will put out whatever they want to put out, regardless of whatever it is that they find on the ground, who the bodies are, what the black box says.
Russian historian and author of Blowing Up Ukraine, Yuri Felshtinsky, has told AM that he believes Prigozhin is dead and that Russia's military intelligence agency, the GRU, is responsible. That's the same agency who it's believed poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal with the nerve agent Novichok in the English city of Salisbury in 2018. Felshtinsky considers the downing of the plane to be a symbolic attack, a response to Wagner forces shooting down Russian aircraft during the mutiny.
Prigozhin and Chutkin, when they were marching to Moscow, on the way shot down 6 helicopters and 1 military plane. That's why they shot down the plane.
The Kremlin denies it had anything to do with the plane crash. US officials believe it's likely that Prigozhin's plane fell from the sky following an explosion on board.
It's 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Meanwhile, reports from southern Ukraine suggest the country's armed forces have broken through some of Russia's key defence positions. This comes after months of fierce battles and only modest gains by Ukraine. For the details, here's the BBC's Paul Adams.
Picking up the pace. Could Ukraine's counter-offensive, slow going since June, be gathering momentum? In recent days, a few tentative signs. Some units do appear to have broken through Russia's formidable first lines of defence south of Zaporizhia.
Further on, that's where we see their supply roads. They use these roads. I'm sure we'll go faster from here. I don't want my guys to think that they can relax now. They know we're moving on to liberate all of our territories.
He says he's looking forward to leading his men all the way to the sea. But that's a long, long way, and this fighting is really hard. Success is still far from guaranteed. Away from the front lines, the country is now in mourning for one of its best-known heroes. This was Andrei Pilshikov, call sign Juice, flying combat missions last year. When Russia invaded, few gave Ukraine's air force much chance of getting off the ground. But from dogfights over Kiev to the interception of Russian cruise missiles, Juice was part of an elite force, fighting against extraordinary odds. He and 2 other senior pilots were killed on Thursday, not in combat, but on a training flight, their jets colliding over a village, the pilots managing just to avoid the houses below. Ukrainians revere their pilots. A year and a half after Russia's full-scale invasion, their status as national heroes is well established. President Zelensky said the death of Andrei Pilshikov and 2 of his colleagues was a disaster. Juice was due to start training on American-made F-16s in a matter of weeks. When the first jets finally arrive early next year, he won't be around to fly them.
Recent flooding in China has claimed more than 80 lives and also caused vast economic damage. The floods struck parts of the country that are not normally subject to these types of disasters. Chinese scientists are now blaming climate change, warning that extreme weather events are now hitting the country more frequently and with greater devastation than ever before. The BBC's Stephen McDonnell has more.
China's recent floods hit hard in parts of the country not accustomed to them. And its meteorological administration says both extreme temperatures and precipitation have definitely increased in recent decades.
It's one thing to talk about climate change in the abstract, quite another to consider real human impacts. This whole town is having to rebuild after the recent floods, and all these businesses, they've been completely trashed by the floodwaters. And the people here, they don't know how they're going to be able to get back to the way their lives were.
Both this man's shops in Zhuozhou, Hebei province, were submerged by the floodwaters.
It will take me 8 to 10 years to recover from these losses. The government has not said whether it will compensate us.
Another man who runs a warehouse said even goods stored high up were destroyed. His wife showed us their mud-filled home.
I can't describe how I felt when I saw this. Our life's work, it's over.
Every year, China's flooding seems worse, and official statistics appear to confirm it. In 2011, the country recorded around 6 floods a month during the summer. By this year, there are 10 times as many.
The Mediterranean is grappling with a mounting migrant crisis. Thousands have lost their lives on the treacherous sea journey from North Africa to Europe this year as a surge of overcrowded and unregistered boats depart from Tunisia. But governments remain reluctant to intervene or accept responsibility for the crisis on what has become the deadliest migration route in the world. The ABC's Tom Joyner reports from Tunisia's Mediterranean coast, and there's a warning: some people may find this story disturbing.
His legs exhausted and his throat parched, Ibrahima Jatta takes a break by the highway on Tunisia's Mediterranean coast. He's travelled for months on foot from Gambia to reach this point, but he still has a long and dangerous journey ahead.
Right now it's difficult to me, I have 2 days I don't eat food.
The 22-year-old dreams of making it across the Mediterranean to Europe, where he plans to start a new life.
I'll try my chance to walk small. 4 weeks, I don't call him my mother, I don't call my father.
More than 100,000 migrants, many fleeing poverty and conflict in sub-Saharan Africa, have attempted to cross the Mediterranean to Europe this year, the most in nearly a decade, according to the International Organisation for Migration. After arriving 2 months ago from Cameroon, Francois Dufar was robbed of everything he owned by Tunisians, leaving him stranded in the country.
I begged for a bit of money to buy something to eat and water to
drink. Taxis refuse to take us. People refuse to help us. We have to walk everywhere.
Francois' plans for Europe are on hold until he can find the hundreds of dollars he needs to pay a smuggler for passage across the sea. Of those who attempt the sea crossing, many don't make it. Unpredictable waters combined with shoddy and overcrowded boats sold by smugglers make for the world's most dangerous migration route. Thousands have drowned so far this year, according to the UN, some of their bodies washing up on Tunisia's coast.
In the port, there are at least 5 or 6 of them a day.
Khaled is a fisherman in El Louza, about 3 hours south of the capital, Tunis. He dreads finding human remains in his nets and pulling them onto his boat to take back to shore.
Sometimes you find a leg, sometimes you find a head, sometimes you find dogs eating them. The people in our village have stopped eating fish because of all the dead bodies.
In response to the Mediterranean crisis, Tunisia's government, with the backing of the European Union, is tightening its sea borders. Tunisian police have arbitrarily arrested migrants and dumped them in the desert near the Libyan border, where dozens perished. For migrants like Francois, every day is a battle just to survive in a country that doesn't want him.
The truth is, we didn't plan to stay here in Tunisia, but we can't continue any further because we've run out of money. We don't even have a phone to call our families.
The reward, though, of a better life in Europe, worth facing any risk.
London's Metropolitan Police say they're angry and concerned after a suspected data breach at one of the force's IT suppliers. Names, ranks, photos and vetting levels of potentially thousands of officers and staff may have been hacked. The breach has been reported to the National Crime Agency. The BBC's Joe Inwood reports.
From protecting Parliament to policing protests, Met officers do some of the most difficult and sensitive jobs in any force. And so the news that some of their data could have been compromised has been met with fury by the Police Federation. Their vice chair saying, to have their personal details potentially leaked out into the public domain in this manner for all to possibly see will cause colleagues incredible concern and anger. And according to a senior former officer, some will be more vulnerable than others.
If you are, for example, a ethnic minority officer with a unusual name, working in counter-terrorism or working undercover, or perhaps working in against organised gangs, you potentially could be more easily identified.
Now, exactly how this happened is still being established, but the Met say there was a data breach at a third-party supplier that had access to information like names, photos and security clearance, but not police contact information. The force says extra security measures have now been put in place. It comes just weeks after a series of data leaks at other forces, including one at the Police Service of Northern Ireland, which saw the details of all staff accidentally published. Those were human error. This seems to be a targeted attack on a third-party IT company, thought to be contracted by the Met to make warrant cards. It's similar to the situation British Airways, Boots and the BBC found themselves in when their payroll provider was hacked.
Earlier this month, San Francisco voted to allow robo or driverless taxis to operate 24 hours a day. Passengers have to book and pay for the journey via an app. But after high-profile accidents, there are renewed safety concerns and some people are determined to get them off the roads. The BBC's James Clayton went for a ride.
One of the things that surprises many visitors when they arrive in San Francisco are these things, driverless robotaxis. They're all over the city. This is me ordering one on my phone. 1 minute away, there's a cab just around the corner. But before I could even get in, a member of the public approached us with a warning.
I think they're unsafe because I saw a guy that was in the crosswalk at night, almost got hit by it.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Cheers. Not exactly the ideal thing to hear just before you get into a cab with no driver. I've been in these cars a few times now, and it never changes. It's always totally surreal. It always feels nerve-wracking when you first start, and it's really surprising how quickly it just becomes totally normal. But the first few sort of roads you come across, T-junctions, you're kind of always slightly apprehensive. Let's see how this does. Our ride was perfectly uneventful, but the city itself is divided over these cabs, run by two companies, Waymo and Cruise. Earlier this month, San Francisco officials green-lighted the use of robotaxis for 24-hour use, only to then restrict their use after an accident between a driverless cab and a fire engine. Authorities are investigating. The flip-flopping is emblematic of a city unsure about whether to embrace these robotaxis, and some have even taken to the streets in protest. A group called Safe Streets Rebel has been disabling the cars by putting cones on their bonnets. A video they put out in July has gone viral.
First, find the cone, make sure their car is empty, and repeat.
It's not entirely clear whether what they're doing is legal, so a spokesperson for the group agreed to be interviewed under the condition of anonymity.
How would you describe your group? Are you vigilantes? Are you a campaigning group? What are you?
We're definitely not vigilantes. I think we're just a group of people. We don't like cars, and we're doing what we can about it.
However, driverless car companies have hit back, saying what the group is doing is bad for road users and is vandalism.
Waymo says what you're doing is vandalism.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
It's not vandalism, because that requires property damage, and we're not damaging anything. As soon as you take the cone off, the cars are right back to working condition and on their way.
They hope to expand across America and beyond. But others here in the city hope they ultimately fail to convince authorities the technology is ready.
How many people in the world have red hair, do you think? Well, it's the rarest colour, gracing only 1 to 2% of the population. The red-haired gene appears with greater frequency, though, 2 to 6% when you go north of the equator. But in a certain town in the Netherlands this week, that percentage is well into double figures. It's the Redhead Days Festival in Tilburg that sees hundreds of gingers descend on the Netherlands. The BBC's Wendy Urquhart reports.
It's a well-known fact that red-headed people get teased a lot, and some even get bullied just because of the colour of their hair. Liam Hunter from Scotland says being with other ginger-haired people makes a massive difference.
Walking around this festival, seeing all these faces, my brothers, my sisters, it's just incredible because I don't feel alone anymore. I feel a part of something that I felt like I was missing my whole life.
In case you're wondering, redheads don't just come from Scotland. Around 5,000 people with red hair came from all over the world to take part in the festival. Jessie Christensen travelled from Las Vegas just to see people who look like her.
The big motivation was just have a sense of community as a redhead, because it can feel isolating when you don't see a lot of people like you. And here, it's just so exciting to see everyone with red hair, no matter the shade of color, come together and celebrate what has made us unique in our own homes and countries.
Portrait photographer Hans Dirksen-Smiths is married to a redhead, and he loves taking photos of everyone at the festival.
I just like to do this kind of work. I find all that red hair beautiful. Mostly I take my pictures in black and white, but of course that's not possible at this festival. But I think it's fantastic.
The Redhead Festival began in 2005 after amateur painter Bart Rowenhurst advertised for 15 models with red hair, and 150 turned up. He decided to make it an annual event, and so far it's been a massive success.
That's it from us. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. And tomorrow from 5, first up, Crush Grapes with a 27-year-old winemaker ahead of the Young Viticulturalist of the Year final. Have a great night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says hecklers disrupting the election campaign are undemocratic. He was speaking after Freedom NZ candidate Karl Mokaraka forced National leader Christopher Luxon to move a media briefing in Auckland this afternoon. A small amount of potentially highly volatile picric acid used in batteries has been removed from the University of Auckland's Medical Sciences building, which had to be evacuated this afternoon. It